Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I like getting hamburgers at In-N-Out Burger, Freddy's, and Culver's. I don't have all of those where I live, but when I travel, I've kind of got my little rotation of which one I like to hit up when I'm in which place. And the food there is good, so I like that. That's part of the deal with all of them, but part of the deal is just the experience in general. I think they do a really nice job. And when I go to any of those three chain restaurants, I feel like I can learn something. I can discern something about the character and the mindset of the people who own it, the people who run the place. I can tell that they know what good food tastes like and that they want to share good food with other people. I can tell that they want to invest heavily in employees who want to be there and that they care about the experience that the customer has because they're very picky about who they hire. I can tell that they've run a mental math equation to say a little bit slower fast food is worth it for a little bit better, fresh-to-order fast food. And I feel like this is the time in the program where I should announce to all of you that this episode of the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast is not brought to you by Freddy's, In-N-Out, or Culver's. I just genuinely think that they taste good, and they help me make a point that I want to make, which is when you look closely at how somebody does something, you can figure out things about how they probably are. This is one of the most fundamental interpretive rules of reading the Bible, whether you are a theist or someone who's just curious about the document but doesn't think there's a God behind it. Either way, if you want to get to the heart of what the book is about, you have to start with the central assumption of the book, which is that the book is about God and who God is and what he's into and what he's up to. Only after you've asked those questions do you get to the question that most of us want to ask right away, which is, where do I fit? Where do I fit is something that can only make sense when you're reading the Bible after you've considered the stuff about God. So every passage then teaches us something about who God is and what God is doing, God's plan. And parables, these allegorical stories that Jesus employs to teach people things about himself and about the kingdom, these are supercharged little nuggets of Bible for understanding more about the God character who is held out as being behind the Bible. So we're in Matthew chapter 13, and we're reading one of what I would say is maybe the 2 or 3 most famous, influential parables of all time. And that parable goes like this. A farmer went out to sow seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it didn't have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked out the plants, but still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, and 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. All right, well, we're going to try to have ears. That's all red letters. Jesus is saying that stuff. So, and you probably saw this coming, my assertion would be that in the same way you can learn something about the people behind a fast food burger joint by how they run their fast food burger joint, so we can learn things about God based on what we see the God character in this parable doing, that being the one who is sowing the seed. In this parable, the farmer isn't exactly God. It's not a one-for-one. Again, we're going to get to a passage a little later on, starting in verse 18, where Jesus says, listen then to what the parable of the sower means, and he's going to break that down a little bit more. But in that explanation, he's like, all right, the farmer is God. Rather, the farmer and the scattering of the seed is reflective then of the superintendence of God. This scattering of seed that seems kind of indiscriminate is happening at the good pleasure of God and at the will of God. Who exactly does the scattering in terms of the parable? I don't know. It could be that God actually goes and does that himself. It could be that Jesus is God in the flesh and he's doing that. It could be the disciples on their big open world quest in Matthew 10, that they're doing some of that. It could be that nature and the self-evident order of things that is woven into existence does some of that scattering of the seed. But it looks like the seed is most closely akin to not just truth in general, but the truth of the kingdom, since everything about the context here in Matthew 13 is pointing toward that. So just the fact that there is such a place as In-N-Out Burger tells me this very basic thing about the ownership. The ownership wants there to be such a place as In-N-Out Burger. I know that seems abundantly self-evident, but if we apply that same reasoning to this parable, well, the implications are a bit weightier. God wants the seed, the message of what his kingdom is about, to be distributed, which means that it is not a happy accident that stuff about God and about God's kingdom gets communicated to people. That is an intentional design on the part of God. Well, why do you scatter around a message? Why do you scatter around seeds? So that teaches us another thing about the character of God who's held out as being behind the Bible, and that is that he is wanting these little seeds, these little data packets that contain all of the genetic coding of the kingdom. He wants this to duplicate. He wants this to grow up, and he wants it to return a harvest. So we also learn then that this king is invested in something for the long haul. He is about the business of taking something little and unimpressive that won't earn him a whole lot of celebration and excitement in the short term and causing that little unsuspecting thing to grow up into something incredible. We also learn that the God character who superintends the scattering of the seed in this parable does not view the indiscriminate scattering of this seed as being wasteful. To me, it seems wasteful. Seeds are expensive. It takes a long time to grow those and prepare those. If you got a whole bunch of them and a bunch of it just gets dumped on some blacktop or a rocky path, that just seems stupid. I wouldn't leave them there, would you? If I spent money on that, or if it was just my job to scatter seeds, I'd be like, oh, dang it, that stinks. And I would get down there and I'd scrape it all back up into my bag, and I would hope the seeds would still work when I put it somewhere that makes more sense. And this is like when I was a paper boy as a kid. I delivered the Pay newspaper, the Fort Collins, Colorado, and people paid money. They wanted it on their doorstep. If it wasn't there at a certain time in the morning, I would get a complaint. If it was, everything would usually go fine. But I knew other people who delivered the Thrifty Nickel. And the Thrifty Nickel was a free paper that was entirely advertising sponsored, and they just got paid to distribute the thing. Well, some of them would lazily go to a dumpster and just heave all of their papers into there and then pretend that they distributed them properly and get paid. But you know dang well, if the good people at the Thrifty Nickel ever found out about what was going on with that kind of delivery shenanigans, they'd be like, you are wasting the thing. That is seed money that we put into that advertising paper that we wanted to go onto doorsteps of people's houses so they would buy things from there so that other people would pay to advertise in there and that we would make more money. That was an investment, and you aren't distributing the seed properly. You're putting it in a place where it's almost certain to get no return. That place being a dumpster. Nobody goes there to read the newspaper. But not likewise here. We get one of those twists that I was saying the other day are always coming in these parables. Here, the person who's in charge of scattering the seed does not view this as a waste. He doesn't stop and collect that seed. He's like, oh yeah, it's on some blacktop. It's on the road. And well, whatever. We'll see what happens. Then he throws it into other stupid places that a more sophisticated farmer would know not to waste valuable seed on. He throws it into a bunch of thorns and into rocky soil. You don't get a return from that. Even if it looks like it works at first and you get some quick credit, it doesn't actually work. It doesn't accomplish the long-term investment. So why is the farmer in this parable so bad? Why would God superintend the obvious squandering of this truth? Well, I think we'll get a little bit more insight into that when we get to the actual explanation starting in verse 18. But for now, I think it's reasonable to theorize that the parable farmer here isn't just interested in the return, but is also interested in the widespread distribution of this seed. Or God, then, is not just interested in putting truth in front of places where it's going to work and catch on. God is interested in his truth permeating everything, every corner of existence, including those corners of existence where God knows that truth is not going to be well received or well regarded. Which leads us to a further observation about the character of God that we can glean from this little parable. And that is that unlike a normal farmer where there's a finite amount of seeds and a finite amount of money to buy more seeds and a finite amount of time to get this stuff all done, this farmer doesn't seem bound by any of those concerns. There's an infinite amount of seed. There's an unlimited amount of truth that can be distributed so we can afford to be real sloppy with it and just put these very valuable pearls, these seed packets of truth in front of everybody, everywhere, all the time, because he's never going to run out. Therefore, I suppose you could also make a case that this farmer, which corresponds to the God who superintends the distribution of his truth, that both are okay with taking the crazy outside chance that something might work out in a place that everybody else would write off. Now, the way the parable plays out, it looks like it only really ever grows up in the good soil. But hey, maybe we can read into it a little bit and say maybe there's some sneaky good soil in places that look like there wouldn't be good soil, and maybe something works there. Could be that one's a little bit of a stretch. We'll check all of our work here against the official interpretation that we get from Jesus, again, starting in verse 18. As much as anything, I wanted to take a day and do this exercise together, you and me, to get our brains in the habit of asking the right questions about these parables as we work through a whole bunch of them in Matthew chapter 13. We are learning stuff about how God is and what God is up to. And what he's up to is the redemptive plan and the kingdom. And hopefully this little exercise helps to recalibrate our brains to read the parables of Matthew 13 well, coming off of a whole bunch of through the front door teaching as well as narrative in the first 12 chapters of Matthew. I like you. I appreciate you. I hope things are going awesome, and I cannot wait to do more of this. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do it again soon.